What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through.
We've been going through this new series over the last 2 weeks now called Radical. And it's all about slow-paced spirituality in a fast-paced world. And if you weren't here, last week we were looking at how the world just seems and it feels as though it's in a big hurry. Life feels as though it's very much in the fast lane. There is so much going on. There is so much that's demanding our interest and attention. We're accessible in ways that we never were even a generation ago. And our prioritizing of things means that people are feeling emotionally, mentally, and spiritually exhausted. And last week we looked at how in this fast-paced world we need to know and experience rest. In particular, we were looking at Sabbath and how God calls us to have a day off once a week where we completely rest. And as I was kind of reflecting on last Sunday, as I was just observing people's body language and behaviour during the course of the morning, and also in the conversations that I had with people after the service, I think that this has struck a chord with us. You know, if I were to use real Christian jargon, I would say that we felt a sense of conviction, didn't we? And I think it's because the pandemic and lockdown forced the majority of people to slow down. And we perhaps resolved to say that actually we're never going to allow ourselves to get as busy again. But the reality was, I love the laugh there, yeah. The reality was lockdown and the pandemic were artificial in what they did. We couldn't do anything because nobody could do anything, apart from politicians, apparently. But I think we all came out of the pandemic thinking to ourselves that we were going to live a different way. We weren't going to allow all the busyness and the rush to dictate our lives. And yet, 2 years later, we are knackered. So when I was speaking about rest last week, I think we get it. We know it. But this week, did we do it? I set a challenge last week, didn't I? Do nothing. The best kind of challenge. Do nothing. Have a day off. A day of rest. That was 7 days ago, people. So my first question to you this morning, have you managed it? Or is it one of those things that you're still trying to find some time for? I heard somebody say this week, if only there were more hours in the day. Have you ever said that or felt that? It's funny because time is constant. We have the exact same hours of day every day, and then we have exactly the same amount of hours every week, and yet at the same time, time feels elastic. After all, time flies when you're having fun, or a watched pot never boils. There are times when it feels like time goes quickly. There are times when it feels like it's taking forever. You need to be in some of the meetings I've been in this week. We know what it means to waste time. And yet in our culture, we would say that we are increasingly time poor. There is a poverty of time. There's just not enough of it. And the time that we have is gripped with filling every spare moment. So when we say, if only there were more hours in the day, we know that all we would probably do is we'd fill up those hours as well. The cultural norm is to fill every spare moment. And that's seen in some of the language that we use. I don't know if you've ever seen these phrases. What does carpe diem mean? Seize the day, seize the moment. If we're going millennial, that's the old school one. If we're going millennial, YOLO. Does anyone know what YOLO means? Hashtag YOLO? You only live once. We've got some young people here. Don't think so to look at them. You can suffer from FOMO. Fear of missing out. So you know it. You're very up on this stuff, aren't we? But we want to be able to do everything. We want to explore every opportunity, be in the know about everything that's going on, not wasting a moment. And you want to know what? That is forming us as people. John Mark Comer puts it like this: how we spend our time is how we spend our lives. It's who we become or don't become. So this morning we're going to continue this series by looking at how we actually spend our time. We're going to be looking at this word, rhythm. And to help us, we're going to look at a very short passage from Ephesians 5. So if you've got your Bible, you might want to switch it on. But we're going to be looking at Ephesians chapter 5, looking at verse 15 and 16. And it's going to be on the screen behind me. Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, or in my translation, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. We give thanks to God for the reading of his word. There is an old cliche that the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But that's what we do. We catch a glimpse of a way that we want to live. We might come to church, you might listen to me rant, we might read books, we might listen to podcasts, and we ache to live differently, a different way, recognizing we're not living our best life. It's why there's been such a growth in the profession of life coaches and self-help books. And we muster up all the willpower that we can, but nothing changes. We just keep living the same lifestyle that we did before. We're rushed, we're hurried, we're mentally frazzled and emotionally overwhelmed, and yet we just keep doing what we've always done before. It's a bit like last week, me saying that we need to rest. Unless we change something about our lifestyle and make some choices, then it will never happen. Unless we say no to some things, it will never happen. If the results you are getting aren't working, then the odds are that something about your life is off kilter. The way that you've organised your morning or evening activities, your diary, your budget, your relationship to your phone, how you manage the resource of time, money and attention. Something's off. Something is off. And it's why I picked this passage from Ephesians. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of time, because the days are evil. Notice how Paul says, be careful, and not just that, be very careful how you live, making the most of your time. Now, I don't believe that Paul was saying that you should fill every minute. That's not what he means. But what he is saying is make the most of the time you have. Be purposeful with it. I don't think that anyone ever gets to the end of their life and on their deathbed says, you know what, I wish I'd worked more. That doesn't happen. You know, I don't think anyone will get to the end of their life and wish they'd played more computer games or scrolled their phone more, that they were an expert at Candy Crush. If anything, the encounters that I've had with people have grieved relationships that they didn't give enough attention to. People have regretted not spending quality time with their family and friends. And it's interesting, I know of people who, when they have been diagnosed with terminal illness, they feel the burden and complete permission to tell all those around them about Jesus. After all, they're making the most of time. As Christians, we are called to make the most of time. And why? Well, firstly, time is forming you. The way that you are using your time, the way that we are using our time, is forming us. If you were to look at your diary and the way in which you spend your time, what would it say about you? If I were to follow you around all day, were to be a fly on the wall in your life, what would a day in your life show to me about what you prioritize? You know, phones nowadays, they have this really helpful function called screen time. You might have seen it, where your phone tells you how long you have been on it and what you have been going on. And it's reckoned that the average person spends 3 hours and 43 minutes on their phone a day. If you want to talk about screen time in its entirety, also going on laptops and things like that, it's 6.5 hours of your day. Now, I don't want to be the phone police here, because we have to recognize that some of that is good stuff. Some of it will be people reading their Bibles, booking in their shopping, doing essential life stuff. But we also know that some of that will be unhealthy. Some of it will be just mindless scrolling. Some of it will be people wanting a dopamine hit when someone says that they'd like something they've posted, like a picture of where they've been. Some of it will be looking at things that you know that you shouldn't. Your phone nowadays tells a story about you. And I said this last week, it is perfectly curated around you. It's all about the things that you like, the things that you're interested in, the notifications that you want to get. It's all about you. And that road you go down in the 96 average interactions you have with your phone every day, they are forming you. And that in microcosm shows something about the fullness of our lives. The way that we use our time and spend our time is forming us. The things that we are prioritizing are the things that are forming us. If we prioritize work to the detriment of everything else, it will form us. If we don't prioritize quality time with family and friends, it means our relationships become increasingly distant. It forms us. A lack of time with the Lord means that our spiritual life is only ever wafer thin. It forms us. The way we spend our time is formative, in the same way that a lack of rest makes us restless. Now, friends, the solution to a busy life is not more time. It's actually to simplify and to slow down our lives around what truly matters. So often we want to do it all, when the bottom line is this: you can't do everything. And this is why. Routine informs the rhythm. Now, as many of you know, I do love sport, and I really love watching tennis. And every now and then you hear this phrase that gets used by the commentators during a tennis match. They'll say something along the lines of, you know what, they've really managed to get into a good rhythm. And what they mean by that is the speed and the tempo of everything that they're doing, and the way that they're playing is able to cope with everything the opponent is throwing at them. It's able to cope with the speed of the surface and everything like that. And interestingly, they talk about rhythm the most when they're talking about serving. Have you ever heard them talk about it when they've talked about serving? Now, if you've ever played tennis, you'll know that to serve, particularly to do a proper overarm serve, is blooming difficult. It's one of those things that is really hard to do. You know, you might get it over, but you probably won't be very good at doing it. It's one of the hardest things in tennis to do. But what you'll notice about every single tennis professional, the ones at the top of the game, when it comes to serving, they have a routine. So Rafa Nadal, if I just do this, you'll understand. He gets into his rhythm, pulls his pants out a couple of times. Novak Djokovic, he'll bounce the ball a certain number of times. Andy Murray, he'll twist his racket round about at least, it's always only ever 3 times. Watch it, it does happen. These small little mini routines. And these small things that they have control over, these simple routines, are going to help them when they are then faced with the more difficult stuff. You know, we have routines for other parts of our life. For example, you know, each morning we get up, we feed the cat, we make coffee, we exercise, we get dressed for work, we eat our breakfast. It's a daily routine with the idea that it's getting us ready for everything that we're going to face that day. Routine informs our rhythm. And if we're to do that in our day-to-day activity, in the same way, we can have a routine that helps us set the rhythm for our days spiritually. So what routines do we need to help with our rhythm so we're not overwhelmed? It's about us following the way of Jesus. I've done the Sunday school answer there. Before Christians were called Christians, the early church was known as the followers of the way. The followers of the way of Jesus. And Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Eugene Peterson in the Message paraphrase puts it this way: "Are you tired? Yes. Worn out? Yes. Burnt out on religion? Yes. Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace." Now, I've been a pastor for 10 years, and it's been a privilege. It's been a blessing. But in those 10 years, I'd like to think I've begun to work out how people tick. And the truth is, there are a number of people who come to church and they just live off other people's spirituality rather than taking the time to develop their own direct experience of God. It was like Kathy was saying to us, it's a relationship. It's about having one voice and 2 ears and sometimes shutting up in order that we might listen. But sadly, sometimes people will come to church and they will hear someone tell them about their experience of God without taking the time to actually meet him for themselves. Friends, God doesn't just exist on a Sunday. He's available to us all the time. Most Christians, they talk about prayer, but they don't actually pray. You know, say, "Oh, I'll pray for you about that." Well, actually do it there and then. Break your rhythm of wanting to rush on to the next thing. Actually pray in that moment for that person. You know, most people believe and they say that the Bible is the Word of God, but they actually have very little idea of what it says inside it. I read an interesting stat this week that in the hour that most people regularly watch telly in the evening, if instead of using that hour to watch the telly, they read their Bible, they would read the entire Bible in 6 months. But we choose counterfeit rest. Friends, if you want to experience the life of Jesus, you have to adopt the lifestyle of Jesus. You have to follow the way of Jesus. You have to learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And let's face it, Jesus' diary was pretty full. You know, if you read the Gospels, everywhere he went, somebody wanted a piece of him. And yet I think one of the things we notice is although Jesus' schedule was incredibly full, we never saw him rushed. People are constantly interrupting him, and yet he never appears flustered. And that's because Jesus used his margins well. Throughout the course of our day, we have margins. When we wake up, when we go to bed, when we travel, when we eat. You know, the Bible tells us that Jesus would get up early in the morning in order to go and pray. He would have long meals with his friends. He would practice the Sabbath. He had routines that informed his rhythm. And this is sometimes called a rule of life. And so I think the challenge for us is if we want to cope in this fast-paced world and to live by a certain rhythm, we have to adopt a rule of life. Now, we don't like rules, we don't like the sound of rules, do we? But the etymology, I love words, the etymology of the word rule comes from the Greek word trellis. And a trellis, if you're a gardener, is a tool that helps the grapevine to get off the ground and to grow upwards. It means that the fruit is able to be more fruitful and productive. In the same way, a rule of life is a trellis that helps us to remain in Jesus and become more fruitful spiritually. A rule of life, very simply, is an intentional, conscious plan to keep God at the center of everything that we do. And if a vine doesn't have a trellis, it will die. And if your life with Jesus doesn't have some kind of structure to facilitate health and growth, it will wither away. It's why there are monastic orders that they live a common life and it's all around a rule of life. But the truth is, we don't need to go and live in a monastery to do that. You can put some trellis up in your own life that will help you to keep God at the center of everything. Now, there are different ways of approaching this. You can check it out, go on the internet for a positive interaction with your phone. You can discover some rules of life. And perhaps you can come to your own rules that provide some trellis for you. But here are some suggestions. I think there needs to be a commitment to worship. Make the weekly worship of God a priority. Loved ones, please hear me. Coming to church on an ad hoc basis probably isn't going to be enough to sustain you in your walk with the Lord, let alone help you be fruitful. You know, once upon a time, a twicer was someone who came to church twice on a Sunday. Now it's someone who comes to church twice a month. There used to be more of an expectation and commitment, not just to church on a Sunday, but also to a midweek small group. But nowadays, people are too busy for that. But the problem is, it's all formative. If a single coal is removed from the fire, it gets cold on its own. It needs to be with others. And it's the same with us. If our culture is deforming us, worshipping the Lord together forms us. And a rule of life isn't limited to the things we do corporately. It's also about the things that happen in the margins of our day. We need to have a devotion to prayer. One of the things that I found really life-giving is a daily office. And that sounds like work, doesn't it? Well, it is. Office comes from the Latin word opus, which means work. And so a daily office is a daily work of God. God has to do a work in me. I don't know about you. He has to do a work in me on a daily basis, sometimes hour to hour. And in the same way, I need to spend time with Charlie in order for our marriage to be strong. I need to spend time with God for our relationship to be strong. And so the daily office is morning, midday, and evening prayer. And in the morning, I pray with the children on our way to school together. And then I pray on my own, on my walk down to the church. It's 15 minutes or so, just lifting to God the things that are going to happen that day, praying that he'll use me. Midday, I set my alarm, and wherever I am, I pray the Lord's Prayer. I think Kevin's getting a bit fed up about that because I keep saying to him, pray the Lord's Prayer with me. But it's amazing how doing that, the discipline of doing that in the middle of your day, it brings God to your attention. And then evening prayer. You know, every night I read my Bible before I go to bed. And I pray and I reflect and I give thanks to God for what's gone on. And what I hope you notice with that, it's not arduous. But that routine, I believe, sets my rhythm. I think we're always more than happy to welcome the distraction when we have a few minutes spare. When we get in the car, what do? Radio goes on. When we sit down at home after our kids have gone to bed, we start scrolling. What if we used that time differently? What if we filled that time with prayer? Our routines and how we use them sets the rhythm. There are other rules of life that we could bring in, like serving. Serving disentangles the consumerist attitude that church is all about me. You know, it's so easy to come to church and just be an audience member. Serving shifts the focus away from ourselves and onto Jesus. And I'm sorry, but I've been there, I've done that, it just doesn't wash with me. You've probably heard my mantra, but God isn't finished with any of us yet. We can all serve. And it doesn't just have to be within the church. We can all serve him. When we're serving other people, the attitude of our heart is that we are serving Jesus. And then giving. One way to break the rhythm of our life is to break the rhythm of our finances. Instead of buying the tap we don't really need and that doesn't last, we can get into a better rhythm of tithing that acknowledges that all God gives us is gift. A rule of life as well is to rest. Rick Warren says this, and I find this so helpful. Divert daily. Do something, anything, even if it's just for 15 minutes a day, where you get away from everything, but you know it's going to be good for you. You know, it was interesting last week when people were leaving, we were talking about exercise. Yeah, that is a helpful diversion on a daily basis. Something like exercise, reading a book, doing something like that you know is going to form you. Withdraw weekly. We spoke last week about having a day of the week, whenever it is, where you do nothing. No jobs, no chores, no work. You just take it as a gift. And then abandon annually. Have some time. Have a holiday. Look, I'm telling you good stuff here, aren't I? Have a holiday where you completely disconnect. Turn your phone off. Take a Polaroid camera with you if you really want to take pictures of your holiday. But just disconnect. We just, the convenience of doing stuff sometimes, it wanders in. We need to have holiday. We need to completely disconnect. We need to be formed. And you're probably sitting there thinking, you know what, I just don't have the time for any of this, Doug. Okay, I hear that. And on some level I can sympathise. But it's a bit like your bank statement when people tell me that they can't give. In the same way that I could look through your bank statement and be able to tell you what you prioritise, it's the same with your diary. What you give your time to, how you use your margins, it is forming you. Now, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but let's see how much screen time you have on a daily basis. Then come back to me and say you don't have any time. Friends, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So maybe some of us need to look again at how we're using our time. The way we prioritise time forms us. Our routine informs our rhythm. And in a fast-paced world, we can have a rhythm that means that we can become closer to Jesus rather than feeling burnt out and empty. As I close, I saw a question this week that's really levelled me, and I want to leave it with you this week. How would Jesus live if he were me? How would Jesus live if he were me? Would he give priority to the things that I appear to prioritise? Would he give the same amount of time to the things that I give my time to? What would the rhythm of my life look like if he were me? What would my relationships look like with other people if he were me? Friends, there is a better way. It's the way of Jesus. Are you tired? Worn out? Burned out on religion? Go to him. Get away with him and you'll recover your life. He'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with him and work with him. Watch how he does it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. He won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with him, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Amen. Amen. Teddy.